The future of the health and fitness space. This has been a topic that's been on my mind for a really long time now, but I haven't really had the energy to make content about it. But now that I'm making a podcast and I'm constantly on YouTube, and some of the content that I'm making is more reactionary content, that means I have to consume more content. I'm more in tune with the news and what's going on. And because of that, I've been really just discouraged and disappointed of the direction that the health and fitness space is going. Not hopeful at all. And I think it's the rise of the Gen Z influencer, the younger kids that are on the up and up. And I have a lot of thoughts about that. I think it's good that we have a new generation coming up, but I'm not sure that their idea of health and fitness is the right idea of health and fitness. We have pretty much bodybuilders that think that bodybuilding is synonymous with health and fitness when it's not. Just because you have a great physique does not mean that you're healthy, does not mean that you're fit. To me, one of the biggest important components of the health side of that is cardiovascular health. And even the bodybuilding community is completely split on whether you should do cardio at all. So to me, you can't not have cardio in the equation and still call yourself healthy. But I'll get more into that shortly. I also want to talk about resistance bands and when you should or should not be using them, because I've been seeing an influx of like top 5 resistance band workouts or, all kinds of different things. But I also want to talk about posture, whether there is such a thing as bad posture. I want to talk about arthritis and the holidays and how I've had an uptick of some of my clients talking a little bit more about how they were a bit achy during the holidays and my thoughts on that. I have some theories on that. And to finish that off, I want to talk about physical therapy and why you should be, 1, looking for someone that doesn't accept insurance, 2, someone that is a proponent of traditional weight training, free weights and all that stuff. And 3, someone that is going to give you homework and spend a lot of one-on-one time with you, not just doing the small group style of physical therapy. But my name is Randall. This is the Always Adaptive Podcast, Episode 9. I am a strength and running coach, 10 years of experience, and I'm making this podcast to just kind of riff on health and fitness news and talk about different studies and such that interest me. And so I hope you'll follow me if you end up liking the podcast. And if you do like it, then hit the like button and maybe perhaps leave me a review. Anyways, on to the first topic. So the future of the fitness space. Originally, I thought about doing this podcast because a video came across my feed by a guy named Shans, Shans. This is a younger dude. He's 21 years old, and he is absolutely massive, and he's strong as shit. He's 315 pounds. Now, the video that came across my feed, initially, I was sort of in disbelief, and I thought it was kind of like a joke or something, but he's in the gym doing a collab with another YouTuber. I believe it was Eric Janicki, another massive guy, and they're working out, they're doing their thing, and then he hits his vape, and he starts panicking, like, oh shit, my vape is empty. I need to go get a new one. And there are people that will say like, oh, he was just joking. But number one, why are you hitting a vape in the first place in the gym? That doesn't make any sense. But number 2, I don't think he was joking. I think he was dead serious and he wanted to actually leave to get a vape. And the reason for that is because nicotine is extremely addicting. And so I used to smoke for a really long time. I've told people this. I also used to vape. I used vape as a means of quitting cigarettes. And then eventually I quit vaping as well. But vaping is extremely addictive. There are those that would say it's even more addictive than cigarettes because of the sheer amount of nicotine you're getting with each puff. It's such a higher volume of vapor than the amount of smoke that you would get. And so to me, I would not put it past him to totally be upset that he's running out of his vape. But anyway, so I thought that was sort of a fluke. And then saw another video of him vaping while working out with a guy named Connor. And he straight up blows his vape in the dude's face.
You vape in my fucking face?
Yeah.
You're supposed to be fucking locked in. Why are you vaping? Guys, Coach Greg, I don't even know what to say at this point. I'll tell you one thing. You make your bed with these things. You better hope they have a fucking plus-size coffin.
Now, this guy's 207,000 subs on YouTube. And this is sort of like the archetype of influencer that's on the rise right now. during that debate that I did a debate breakdown, the natural bodybuilders versus steroids debate over on the Jubilee YouTube channel. When I was breaking that down, I came across the guy Togi, so another younger influencer, 24 years old. And his stance was like smoking cigarettes and doing steroids and doing all this stuff is dope. And it's like cool. And, basically the instant gratification, can't see the long-term consequences of anything, doesn't really care, which, hey, a lot of us were young and dumb at a certain point in our life. But for people to be embracing this younger crowd as sort of like the mecca of the next generation of health and fitness, it seems really silly to me. Now, there are people that would say, well, hold on a second, nicotine can make you stronger. True, that is true. However, it also increases your blood pressure and increases your heart rate. So when you're doing something like a high intensity lift, okay, nicotine is a nootropic. It can increase your focus. That's why people love to work and take nicotine. They'll do pouches while they're working and such. But if you're doing a heavy set or you're doing a long duration set, a very high intensity set, and you're taking a supplement that's further increasing your blood pressure, further increasing your BPMs, your heart rate, and you already have sort of like this unhealthy environment in that you're taking steroids, which increases your blood pressure, you're sort of eating whatever it is that you want to eat, all the fast food in the world, then the likelihood you're going to have a cardiac event is very, very high. Now, he's not the only one. There's a guy named Sam Sulek. Now, don't get me wrong. I love Sam Sulek. He's made a lot of really great changes recently, but Sam Sulek, I believe he's also 21, but an absolute behemoth of a man, super strong guy, has a ton of muscle. But when he first started getting famous, and trust me, don't get me wrong, there was a saying that when he first blew up, we made the right person famous. And I fully believe that. I think Sam Sulek deserves to be famous. He's a very nice guy. He's very smart, very well-spoken, very respectful to everyone. So I think he's great. But when he first started, he literally was making videos of him eating whatever he wanted to eat. And, all the fast food in the world didn't matter to him. And that's because he didn't really have that many people in his ear because he wasn't really popular. But as he gained more and more notoriety and more of the bigger name older guys started to catch wind of him, more people started to get in his ear like, hey, dude, you might want to, pump the brakes a little bit on the quality of your food and, just slow down a little bit because, he was going 1,000 miles per hour. And some of his older videos, you can find videos where he has just an obnoxious amount of acne all over his chest, all on his shoulders and his arms and stuff. And a lot, like it was crazy. And that's a byproduct of him essentially just putting whatever he wants inside of his body, and his body's trying to find whatever way possible to purge that crap, essentially. So he looks much better now. You find videos of him now. He's got a nice haircut. His skin is completely cleared up, and he's eating cleaner. And that gave me a little bit of hope until I started finding people like Togi and finding people like Sean's. And there's more of them out there. There's more of these like really massive people that are just aggressive and angry and just trying to move as much weight as possible and be as big as possible. And they don't care about the consequences, and they'll eat whatever and they'll take whatever. So, the nicotine thing, I hope that doesn't catch on, because I'm going to play a video. This is an Andrew Huberman video where he talks about how there are compounds in the vape that are so small that they can pass through your blood-brain barrier. And so like we are essentially running an experiment on vapes right now, just like we are with sucralose, by the way. I told a story in a different podcast on the origin of sucralose and how potentially the origin of it was intended as a pesticide, potentially. Now the story, I don't want to go into the story again. Essentially, two scientists were testing a compound, chlorinated sucrose. One scientist had said to the other scientist, test this compound. The other scientist misheard him for taste this compound. And that's the story on how it became a sweetener. But sucralose is in everything now. And no one signed up for any sort of long-term study. There's no safety data on sucralose. Like we're essentially going to find out in 5 to 10 years what the long-term effects of that are. Now, think about the uprise in all kinds of different conditions. There's something called turbo cancers that are out there right now. Where did that come from? Is that coming from sucralose? Is that coming from vapes? Just because there's not as many carcinogenic reactions in a vape than there are with like a cigarette and the burning of all the different chemicals and stuff in tobacco doesn't mean that it's safe. Now, I will say that vaping is better than smoking cigarettes. I fully believe that. But combining vaping with working out is a big problem. So I'm going to play this video for you just to get you an official neuroscientist talking about the health decrement of vaping.
How concerned do you think we should be about vaping?
We should be very concerned. Vaping is associated with disruptions in egg health, and what they call egg quality can create certain mutations in eggs and serious endocrine issues in women. It's a mutagen. It mutates the genes of cells. It mutates the genes of rapidly dividing cells. So breast cancers, ovarian cancers, egg quality. So, people always say, no, well, I vape all the time and I got so-and-so pregnant or whatever. Women will say, I have a perfectly healthy kid. That kid might have been much healthier. And also the kid's not grown up yet. Like, introduce me to the kid later. But it is so clear that you're introducing a laundry list of toxins to the lungs, and they're getting into the bloodstream, and there are a number of them that cross the blood-brain barrier. So I can't find one good reason why people should vape.
So again, that was Andrew Huberman. Definitely go follow him. He's a fantastic podcast host. He's a neuroscientist and he's a professor over at Stanford. He does all kinds of health and fitness content where just super educational. But all in all, I hope that more people from the millennial crowd aren't tempted by the viewership of the younger crowd, because that is what this is. People are starting to see, like, if you can tap into Gen Z, you can get a massive following. And the reason for that is because Gen Z, well, they don't really know that much, right? They're coming out of school. They're kind of experimenting with all kinds of different things. They haven't sat and chewed on ideas philosophically for a long time. And so they're more susceptible to the negatives of where the health and fitness space is heading. But I hope they keep their eyes on the space of actually educating people, like the people that are influencers. I hope a lot of them grow up like Sam Sulek did and start to eat a little bit cleaner and take their health more seriously, and start educating people on the downsides of taking steroids and the downsides of following if it fits your macros type of diet where you're just kind of eating whatever as long as it fits within your calories and macros. Not to say that cannot be a useful tool. It absolutely can. But all in all, I just hope that we start to get the health and fitness back to the health and fitness community and not just stay so focused on bodybuilding where everyone's just trying to be as massive as possible and that's it. Anyways, on to the next segment. I don't want to harp too long on steroids because Lord knows you guys have been dealing with me talking about that for a really long time. Resistance bands. So again, the reason why I wanted to talk about resistance bands is because the YouTube algorithm has been pushing these down my throat. Best resistance band exercises, top 5 resistance band workouts, and all this stuff. Resistance bands you should buy. So the big question here is, should you use resistance bands? And my answer is sometimes. It really just depends. But firstly, I have to say that I favor full range of motion during resistance training. And that's not necessarily from a hypertrophic standpoint. Hypertrophy is the process of building muscle on the body. So I don't view range of motion through that lens. I view it from a functionality and safety, like injury prevention lens. And the reason for that is, like, if you pay attention to the hypertrophy research on whether or not full range of motion is better than partial range of motion or vice versa in terms of the amount of muscle that's built, you would walk away confused because it's completely mixed. And it seems like every few months or so, there's a new study coming out that kind of refutes what was said before. So for me, I don't even think about it from a muscular development standpoint, because obviously both of them work, right? I could do partial reps and I could do full range of motion. And in fact, you could do full range of motion. And then when you start to fail, you could do partial reps at the end. I think that's a really good idea. And I think most people would get really good progress with that. But anyways, from an injury prevention standpoint, it's very important to have strength through full range of motion. Now, why do I say that? Because resistance bands, while they are providing resistance, it's what we call accommodating or varying resistance, meaning the resistance is changing based off of what portion of the lift that you're in. So let's say you're standing on a long resistance band and you're doing bicep curls. You have one end of the resistance band in each hand. At the bottom of the bicep curl, the resistance band loses its tension, which means that you no longer have resistance. You no longer have tension in your bicep either. And that's extremely important because that lengthened position, to me, that's full range of motion. You want to have just as much strength in your lengthened position as you do in the contracted position. So to me, it doesn't make sense to use a band as a primary loading mechanism for your exercises, because you're essentially taking half of the lift out of the equation. And that's very important. I mean, if you think about a squat, if someone's doing a squat, the most important part of that squat is the bottom position. And if someone let's say someone can squat 225 for 6 reps and they're hitting parallel depths, I am one of those people that thinks you should go ass to the grass, but just for this, for what I'm talking about right now, we're not going to think about that. So if someone's hitting 225 for 6 and they're hitting parallel with their squat, then they decide to go up to 245. But all of a sudden at 245, they're no longer hitting parallel. They're 4 or 5 inches higher now. They can't go that low with 245 on their back. They are lacking strength in that bottom position. Now, if they tried to push themselves there anyway with 245 on their back, they'd hurt themselves. They do not possess the strength in that parallel position to squat 245 pounds for 6 reps. Now, the same thing applies to bands. I view it very similarly. You want to be able to load that bottom position, because otherwise you're running into the exact same scenario of what I just spoke about, where they don't have strength to hit that parallel position with 245. So that's my viewpoint on, what is going on with a band and why I don't think it's good as a primary loading mechanism. But when they are useful, so again, I mentioned accommodating resistance or varying resistance. So accommodating resistance, you've probably seen old school videos of people doing barbell squats with chains. They'll have chains hanging on the bar. And what that's meant to do is, as someone's standing up from the bottom of the squat, the load is getting heavier and heavier and heavier. So what that encourages is power. There is a difference between strength and power. Strength is how much weight you can move. Power is how fast you can move it. So when someone's standing up from the floor and the weight is getting heavier as they're doing so, they had better make sure they have a pretty good amount of power and momentum driving them, because as the weight gets heavier, they're inevitably going to slow down. So if they're already kind of going a little slow to begin with, there's a good chance they're going to fail to lift. As they're standing up, the links of the chain are resting on the floor. And as they stand up, each link that gets taken off the floor adds more weight to it. So bands are the exact same thing. Bands have very little resistance at the bottom. And as you're pressing, or as you're standing up, or as you're curling, the weight gets heavier and heavier and heavier as the band gets more tension in its system. And so I think using them for that can be really useful. And one of the main applications for that is like a sticking point. If someone, let's say there's a power lifter that has a really strong squat out of the bottom position, but there's like a sticking point about 2/3 of the way up, where once they hit that, they usually fail to lift. Well, finding ways of using accommodating resistance like chains and bands to get them through that sticking point, to find creative ways of loading that specific part of the lift, can be really useful. In that same vein, I think bands are very useful for power development for that same reason, where you don't really have much load at the bottom, but as you go and you go and you go in the lift, the tension gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And if you're using a really thick band, that tension can be tremendous. So you can use power development. You can use bands as a power development tool. You can also use it for things like push-ups. Unless, like if you're doing sets of 50, you're better off putting a plate on your back and doing loaded push-ups, or potentially 2 if you're that strong of a person and you don't really have access to bench pressing or anything. But if you're kind of at the point where you're doing 15 push-ups and you're kind of stuck there and you're not really sure what to do or how to continue to progress, you can get one of those long, thick bands, have one end on each hand, wrap it around your back, and add some load to your push-up. And by the way, that will add power to your push-up. That'll teach you how to explode out of that bottom position, because as you're pushing up, the band is getting more tension and you're having to work harder at the top of the lift. I also think bands are useful for dealing with asymmetries and like movement dysfunction and stuff. So like if someone has one side that's kind of crooked during a movement, you can put internal feedback on the body with the band to get them to feel some sort of feedback that's going to create change in the body. Or if, let's say, someone has a valgus collapse in the knees, that's a really easy example. Although there has been some discussion on whether or not that's actually effective. I believe there's a new study that came out that I'll have to talk about that actually showed that people that put bands on their knees, actually it created more valgus collapse. But I need to look into that because I also think how you coach that and how you cue that is extremely important as well. So it doesn't make a difference if you put a band on someone's knee, but you don't show them how to push out into it and you just put it on their knees and have them walk without telling them anything. Yeah, you're essentially ruining their posture there. But I think I've seen a lot of good stuff from my people over the years. I've certainly put bands on people's knees, but I think there's a specific way of doing it. I mean, not to go off on a tangent here, but you got to think of your posture as the same thing. So a lot of people have excessive forward lean with the squat. And so if you can put a band as an external feedback system around their neck and attach it to something like a dumbbell rack or kettlebell rack or something, wherever you have any sort of attachment to attach a band, you have this band that's constantly pulling them forward while let's say they do a set of 10 to 15 bodyweight squats. That band serves as a feedback system. It serves as proprioceptive feedback. That's what it's called. So it's giving them feedback to pull back against something. So even though it's pulling them forward, their body responds in the opposite fashion. And the valgus collapse, the bands on the knees, that's very much the same thing. Their knees already collapse inward during a squat. And so the idea is to push that dysfunction more to give them a feedback loop that they can push out against and hopefully get their knees more in line with their ankles and their toes. I've seen a lot of good stuff with that, but who knows? So you could use them for isometric holds. So again, you could put it on someone's knee and try to get them to activate their glute medius. You could put it on the wrists or the forearms and work external rotation holds where an isometric hold is just finding a contraction, any point in the range of motion, and just holding that position for as long as you can. You've probably seen people do wall sits where they sit up, their back up against the wall and they squat down and they just hold that position. That's an isometric hold. So I think bands can be useful for that style of exercise. When they're not useful, it is, again, a primary loading mechanism for compound and isolation lifts where they would lose their tension in the lengthened portion of the lift. Because again, that is to me the most important portion of the lift, just in terms of functionality and injury prevention. But the bottom line here is that training with free weights and cable machines is almost always going to be more effective than any sort of resistance band exercise or workout you could find on YouTube. So as opposed to trying to find the best resistance bands videos and buying a pack of cheap resistance bands because you're trying to save money, dish out a little bit of money for something like an adjustable kettlebell or an adjustable dumbbell set and look up dumbbell and kettlebell workouts. The free weights are way more valuable. I promise you, you'll make a lot more progress. You'll be able to load a lot heavier. And so you'll get much stronger and you'll build much more muscle. Those are my takes on that. Up next, I want to talk about posture. So I've seen a few videos now over the years that say things along the lines of there is no such thing as bad posture. And the idea there is that no matter how bad your posture is, if you're moving frequently, then you're sort of stopping that from becoming your default. And I just really disagree with this wholeheartedly. Even though someone's moving around doesn't mean there is no such thing as good or bad posture. I mean, the question I would pose is if someone gets stuck with a certain posture, is there a posture that's better than another one? And clearly, I'm sure you're thinking in your head, oh yeah, obviously. Like you don't want to get stuck with a very extreme kyphotic posture. Like kyphosis, for those of you who don't know, is an excessive flexion of the thoracic spine where you'll see people that are literally stuck, usually older people. They're stuck looking down at the floor and they really can't pick their head up. And you might laugh at that and say that doesn't actually exist, but I promise you it does. And I've worked with some people. I worked with a gentleman a long time ago in his 80s up in Maryland, and he was stuck like that. And he could not look up at me. He could raise his eyes and barely look at my chin, but he couldn't raise his head. He was absolutely stuck. And so someone getting stuck in that posture, as opposed to, let's say someone gets stuck with my posture right now. I have really good posture. I mean, I'm sorry, I would love to get stuck in my posture. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So the fact that there's that polarity between the two, clearly there is such a thing as bad posture. Now, The question is, can being in a poor posture for a certain amount of time actually affect what your default posture is? And absolutely, I'm going to make the argument for it here. Now, you could say if you set 15-minute reminders to get up, then okay, it doesn't matter as much as if you stayed in that position sedentary for an extended period of time. But it absolutely does. It can. So there's something called motor programming. Every action you take you have motor units all over your body that are sensing movement, that are censoring your environment, and they're sending information to your central nervous system, your brain, and your brain is sending information back to various muscles and telling some muscles to contract and inhibiting some other muscles from contracting, trying to relax other muscles. And it's doing that based off of the activity that you're doing. So if you're constantly driving with your hand at 12 o'clock, you're driving with one hand, let's say your left hand, your body, your nervous system is going to remember that. And your nervous system is constantly sending signals back and forth to make you really strong at that left hand at 12 o'clock position. Me right now, I'm shifted over on my left hip, and I'm very aware of that. I can continue to shift back and forth right to left, but the fact that I keep ending up on my left, and I'll stay here for 5 to 8 minutes, who knows, every time I start to realize it, I'll try to shift. But the fact that it's my default, that's what matters. No matter how many times I shift back and forth, I still always end up on my left. And that's for a reason, because that's a learned behavior. Over the years, I've spent time shifting on this left hip, and it's going to take a tremendous amount of time for me to reverse that. So it doesn't matter me standing here how many times I shift my weight right to left. If I keep ending over on that left-hand side, that means that you can learn bad posture, right? Because I'm a proponent of movement and constant movement and setting movement reminders and stuff. But if someone keeps ending up with poor posture, right, no matter how many times they set an alarm, if they're sitting, let's say they're sitting for an hour working diligently, and they're in this really focused, flexed over kyphotic position, and then their alarm goes off, they get up, they stretch, they do whatever, they go get a snack and drink of water, they come back, and then the second they sit back down, they're right back in that posture. That is learned. Their nervous system is constantly taking that information. Is like, okay, she likes to sit in this position, so let's tighten up certain muscles like the pec minor, and let's inhibit and stretch other muscles just to make this as comfortable for her as possible, because, you know, based off of her past behavior, she's probably going to be here for another hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, who knows? And so, like, okay, it sounds good to say that there is no such thing, but I don't subscribe to that. I mean, I'm sure you've known people that hold a wallet in one of their back pockets, and they'll be at work, and that wallet, they'll be sitting at a desk with that wallet underneath one of their hips. And so they get, one of their hips is hiked up. These are usually the people that have back pain, by the way. Next person that tells you they have back pain, ask them. If it's a man, they're like, hey, do you have a wallet in your back pocket? Or did you at some point in your life? I did for a really long time, until I wised up. This was before I got into health and fitness. I used to have a wallet in my back right pocket. But holding that wallet there and then sitting down for hours with your hip hiked up, when you go to stand up, your nervous system now has a predictive map about what positions you like to hold, and it will maintain some degree of a hip hike. And so when you go to stand up, things are going to get wrenched, things are going to get twisted, and it's not good. So kyphosis dramatically affects the posture of the shoulders and the functionality of the shoulders. If someone is really rounded over, their scapula are going to be pulling upwards on their girdle, which means that they can't get their arms fully overhead. Now, like, again, if we can say these things, that there are these bad things, then I don't understand how you could say that there is no such thing as bad posture. So I think, yes, the takeaway here is that it's not the end of the world if someone's sitting with bad posture for 15 minutes, but as long as they have some reminders and stuff, but they should still be trying to remind themselves, like, hey, this isn't really a good posture. And if I am going to be sitting, even if it's just for 15 minutes, there are better postures than others. And so working to spend time in the better postures than the more poor postures. And if you ever hear someone say there is no such thing as bad posture, ask them that question. Would you rather get stuck with kyphosis, or would you rather get stuck upright? And if they say kyphosis, then there's something wrong with them. But my guess is they would say they would like to get stuck upright. And if that is their answer, clearly there is such a thing as bad posture. So arthritis. It's been a couple weeks now since the end of the holiday celebrations, and I'm sure some of you can relate to this, but I've had multiple people, some clients, some friends, some family, talking about how they're more achy now than before the holidays, or even during the holidays, they were really, really achy and they're starting to improve now. And the reason why this is important is because on more than one occasion over my tenure, you could say as a personal trainer, you hear things like, oh, that's just my arthritis. And it has sort of a note of this is this just is the way things are. And there's nothing really I can do about it. And I think that this is sort of like a hopeless idea where just because you have pain, if you think about arthritis pain on a scale of 1 to 10, and let's say typically it's at like a 7 when you first wake up. Well, the question you should ask yourself, is there anything I can do to make it a 4 out of 10? Meaning you're not curing the pain, you're not getting rid of your arthritis totally, but you're taking steps to make sure that there aren't extra things that are irritating it. So typically as we age, a lot of things that can happen due to all kinds of different factors, but we can get a wearing away of our cartilage or a thinning of our ligaments and tendons. And so joints or bones can end up grinding up against each other due to dysfunction. And so they're hitting each other at different angles. There's all kinds of factors, like I said. But once that cartilage is gone and you start to get this bone on bone condition, that starts to get irritated and that can cause inflammation. You start to get an inflamed joint. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that the things you're eating, the sleep habits that you have, the stress, all the different things that we know affect pain, that affect your inflammation. I mean, inflammation is pain in a lot of different ways. They're not synonymous, but it's definitely related. But just because you have that bone on bone doesn't mean that there aren't other things that are affecting your pain. And so the way that you should think about it is, are there things that I can do to bring this pain from a 7 out of 10 to a 4 out of 10? Now, the way that I think about it is try to be mindful of when you're not in pain. This is super important because the more you can pay attention to when you're not in pain, the more you can start to change your story of I'm always in pain. I like to use this example because people will say this often. When it rains, I get a headache. Well, how many times has it rained and you did not get a headache? Okay, so now we have some progress because I would venture to guess that it's rained a lot in your life and you didn't even have a blip of a headache. You had absolutely no reaction. Now, I'm not saying that the rain isn't affecting your headaches. I'm just saying if you have the expectation that every time it rains, you're going to have a headache, then guess what? You're going to have a headache. And human psychology is just super powerful like that. And so if you view other pain reactions, pain responses the same way, you don't have to be in pain. Like you don't have to be at a 7 or a 6 out of 10 pain just because you have arthritis. And if you pay attention to when you're not in pain, you can get an idea of what are the habits and behaviors that I'm participating in that are helping my pain ease up. This goes into food journaling. So shocker, spoiler alert, going into food journaling here in a moment, but this is why food journaling is very important. But not just journaling about your negative symptoms where you wake up and you feel puffy and you're hurting and you have all these things, didn't sleep well, but also like if you're really journaling consistently, you'll take note of the day where I woke up at 6 a.m. I feel energized. I feel alert. I have minimal pain, 1 out of 10. And if that becomes a trend over a few days, now you can look back in your journal and be like, okay, during this stretch of time, I was not in pain. What was I doing? How was I eating? What were my behaviors? And when you figure that out, then you keep doing those things, just like you would look at what's causing pain. Okay, what food? Oh, I ate this chili pepper and it caused me a lot of pain the next day. You stop eating the chili pepper. There's all kinds of foods. With me, it's avocados and almonds. I can't eat those foods. I would not know that unless it was, if it weren't for food journaling. And so there are foods you are eating right now that you think are healthy for you that aren't necessarily healthy for you. Just because they're healthy for one person doesn't mean that they're healthy for all people. And in fact, there's even more research coming out now that certain populations from different regions of the world can handle certain foods differently. Certain populations might be able to eat rice better than others, might be able to handle rice better than others. Other populations might not be able to handle rice and they might handle fat better than others. Populations that eat a lot of blubber, whale blubber comes to mind. their body is likely adapted in a way that allows them to handle that huge load of fat. So the takeaway here is just because you're in pain doesn't mean you have to be in pain, and pay attention to when you're not in pain. And the reason why I brought this up is because there's someone I was talking to where the holidays hit, they were in a lot of pain. And I won't tell their whole story and I won't name them, but they were in a lot of pain. We were working together. Before the holidays hit, they were perfectly fine. And when I say perfectly fine, I mean little to no pain whatsoever. And then all of a sudden the holidays hit, they have this pain stuff coming back. And then here comes the story. Oh, that's just my arthritis. Well, what about before the holidays? Was that still just your arthritis? Why weren't you hurting 4 weeks ago? So if you pay attention to that stuff, it empowers you. It puts you in control and allows you to also adopt a more optimistic outlook of like, maybe it's not hopeless. Maybe there is some hope for me. Maybe I don't have to be in excruciating pain all the time. But step one is paying attention. So if you are a food journaler, don't just write down the bad stuff. Write down when you're feeling good. It'll help you stay optimistic. And if you're not food journaling and you are in pain, and if you're not food journaling and you have any sort of digestive condition like colitis or Crohn's disease, I would implore you to start a food journal. It's one of the best tools that you could possibly start and use to help you start to make progress towards a more positive and uplifting life. Speaking of pain, I want to talk about physical therapy. And the reason I want to talk about physical therapy is, number one, I would venture to guess that most of you have had some sort of experience with physical therapy, whether it was from, post-op or some sort of injury that you went through. Most people will go through physical therapy. And the thing that made this come to mind for me was a friend of mine just recently went through physical therapy, and she had a neck issue that she was dealing with. And, tell me if this reminds you of anything, but typically physical therapy is like you go, if you find a therapist that takes insurance, it's usually going to be a small group physical therapy setting where there might be 4 or 6 other patients there with you. And the physical therapist has a station and they're kind of cycling back and forth between the different patients and telling them what to do, making sure they're doing it properly and all that stuff. But really the supervision is very limited. So that was her experience. And I know I've been told time after time over the years from different clients and friends and family members that that's the experience that they have too. And this is why, like, anytime I have a client that is dealing with any sort of pain, or something that they just need, it's something outside of my scope that I need to refer out to, I always encourage them to find a physical therapist that does not accept insurance. Another client of mine had a similar experience as the one I just explained, but this one was even worse, where I went over his exercises with him. So they gave him the packet. I'm sure you all know about the packet that has like the diagrams of how to perform the exercise properly. And so I was just going over that with him as part of his warm up before we started to get back into strength training. And I noticed that he was doing the wrong arm because I knew which arm was injured, and he was doing the physical therapy on the wrong arm. And I said, "Hey, you're doing the wrong arm." And he said, "The physical therapist never fixed me, never corrected me." I'm like, "You're serious?" I was like, you're literally, you've been doing this arm in physical therapy? And his answer was yes. And so that was like kind of the tipping point for me, where I was just like, holy crap, man. Because I mean, he's old. He's 60. He was at this point, I think he was 61, 62 years old. And so like, if something goes wrong, the amount of attention and effort he needs to put into it needs to be extraordinary. He really needs to focus and make sure he's doing things right. And so that really bummed me out that his physical therapist didn't even catch that he was doing the wrong arm. And so the reason why I think it's important to find a physical therapist that doesn't accept insurance, and I know it sucks because it's going to cost more money, but there are good reasons why they don't. And, reason number one is a lot of times physical therapists are limited by insurance companies on what kind of treatments that they can use on you. And so if you come in with an issue and a physical therapist knows a treatment that will help you, but it's not covered by insurance guidelines, then they won't use it on you. They will try other means. And most of the time, it's not going to matter because a lot of physical therapy outcomes show that going for 3 sessions is no different than going for 1, meaning your outcome, the first session might be the most important physical therapy session that you have. and any other subsequent sessions you have after that aren't really having an impact on whether or not you're going to recover. Let's just pick 8 weeks. Someone that has one session might recover after 8 weeks, and someone that has 3 sessions might recover after 8 weeks. It doesn't really matter. But these people have a focus on quality over quantity, and they will spend one-on-one time with you where they're not, shuffling you off to someone else. They are right in your face, making sure that, like when I'm doing strength training with people, with my clients, I am a stickler for form. I'm watching them like a hawk. And I think physical therapy is even more important because you're dealing with potentially post-op people. You're dealing with just like really severe injuries, tears and stuff. And so if you're just kind of letting them, going back to motor programming, what I was talking about earlier, if you're just kind of letting them learn bad behaviors and stuff, because someone that's in pain, they're going to move differently than someone that's not in pain. Their nervous system being fired in a sympathetic way, fight or flight, they're going to start to develop compensatory strategies to avoid that pain response. And so you're going to see little things like when they go to flex their shoulder, their trap might take over and they might get a little bit of elevation with their scapula. Those are little things that you have to watch people like a hawk. And if you just let them go on and on and on, that becomes a motor program, that becomes their new behavior. And so in a group setting, it's hard to catch those little things. With one-on-one, they're watching you, but I also think the other thing here is there's been an uptick of physical therapists that they used to be athletes or they used to be Olympic weightlifters or whatever. And so you're seeing these physical therapists that have a really strong focus on traditional weight training in conjunction with traditional physical therapy exercises. But these people are gold mines, and you should try to find one in your area if possible. Like, do the digging and find the person, because you're going to walk into this person's clinic and it's not just going to be bands and balls hanging up, BOSU balls and like tennis balls and little things and a bunch of foam rollers and stuff. You're going to see barbells, power racks, heavy dumbbells. You're going to see cable cross machines. You're going to see all kinds of cool shit. And they're going to not only be using the bands and the balls and stuff to mobilize your tissues, but they're also going to be trying to get you to a place where you're lifting heavy, because that is the importance of it, especially if you're a strong person, you have any sort of weight training background or any sort of athletics background. If you sustain a labrum tear, let's just say, for example, and you go through a traditional physical therapy setting and they just use some exercise bands, by the way, what was I talking about? Full range of motion. So exercise bands, you're not getting loaded in full range of motion, right? They can be useful for isometric holds, but they're not useful. You're not getting any load at the bottom end range of motion. And so they might have you, do some letters with put a tennis ball on the wall and trace out some letters. They'll have you do some internal and external rotation drills. Those drills are not going to get you back to bench pressing. I promise you they're not. They might help your pain go away, but if that physical therapist doesn't have a treatment protocol that's specifically like, hey, what did your exercise program used to look like? Okay, you used to do this bench press, you used to do flat bench press, you used to do incline, you used to do overhead press. Okay, that's interesting. So that means that not only do we have to get the pain out of your shoulder, but we have to get you back to those activities. And so a good physical therapist that has a focus on traditional weight training, they're going to have that barbell in their setting, and they're going to show you how to do things properly. And honestly, those people are usually beasts, and you're probably going to walk away with a whole lot better form than before you met them. You're going to walk away having much better bench press form or much better military press form than you had, or much better squat form, whatever, because these people are straight movement ninjas, they're very valuable. So I really would say, like, please dish out the money. Don't be attached to your insurance. I know you have insurance and I know you want to use your insurance, because why do you even have it? But the healthcare system is not a good system, and they're just trying to shuffle you in, shuffle you out, and move on to the next person. They really don't care about your outcome. They just want your money. But the reason why I said that, there's been research on the amount of physical therapy sessions that you have is because there was a meta-analysis. So there's this study was called One and Done, the effectiveness of a single session of physiotherapy compared with multiple sessions to reduce pain and improve function, quality of life in patients with a musculoskeletal disorder. A systematic review with meta-analysis, archives of physical medicine and rehabilitation. So this was a meta-analysis of 6 randomized controlled trials with 2,090 total participants. And they were studying osteoporotic vertebral fractures but they were also studying neck pain, knee pain, and shoulder pain. Now, the findings were multiple sessions had a small but statistically significant advantage in pain improvement at 6 months, but this difference disappeared at 3 months and 12 months. Okay. Function. No significant differences in functional outcomes were observed at any time point. That's pretty important. Quality of life. No significant differences in quality of life outcomes were observed at any time point. So if you think about that, okay, the 6-month pain improvement, that could just be an artifact because they did not find a pain improvement at 3 months. So what's special about 6 months? There's all kinds of things that could interfere with that. But the point there is that once you get your program, the typical physical therapy, the quick caveat, if you find a good physical therapist, like I was talking about, that has a focus on traditional weight training, I would venture to guess if they could find more of those people and put them into these studies, they would see a dramatic difference between multiple sessions and one session. But what's happening here is, again, once you get your list of exercises, your packet, they're not supervising you anymore. So it's like everything you're doing is no longer special. And in fact, the quality of your movements, the quality of your exercises is going to be downgraded now because you're no longer getting their eyeballs on you as frequently as possible. And they're not catching the little dysfunction and stuff like I was talking about. And so, yeah, I think if you can afford it and even just one session, I mean, if you think about finding a really good physical therapist and just getting one session, I think that would be more valuable to you than getting 4 or 5 sessions with the run of the mill, stuck in the health insurance scam. And yeah, you'd also walk away learning a whole lot more about your body than you would in the traditional environment. But look, bottom line is shop around. And yeah, just try to find people that have some sort of athletic background, some sort of weight training background. A good follow on Instagram is there's a guy named the Barbell Doc, and let's see here. Oh, I just had him up. But yeah, so there's this guy, the Barbell Doc on Instagram. He was an athlete that was injured and found the traditional style of physical therapy was extremely disappointing. And so he became a doctor of physical therapy, but he took matters into his own hands. That is a good follow on Instagram, Barbell Doc. Go follow him and you'll get a lot of useful injury prevention tips. You'll get a lot of useful bouncing back from injury tips and some good weight training tips too. I mean, the guy's great. So those are the types of people that I would say to follow on social media to make sure that you're staying durable, preventing injuries, bouncing back from injuries, making sure your weight training form and all that stuff is getting great, because those athletes, even if it's, whatever the athletic background is, typically they'll have some sort of weight training background for a very long time. And specifically, if you can find people that are Olympic weightlifters, oh man, those people are a straight up gold mine. Anyways, that's it for me. If you're still here listening and watching, I really appreciate you. And I hope if you got some value out of this, share it with a friend, share it with someone you think might benefit from it. And if you did actually like it, then like the podcast wherever you're watching, or leave a review. And whether it's a 3-star or a 5-star, I don't really care. I'm just looking for feedback and I'm looking for ways of improving, whether that's the lighting, whether that's the angles, my diction, my speech, my attitude, any of those different things. I can always improve just like all of us. So once again, my name is Randall. This is the Always Adaptive podcast. I'm a running and strength coach of 10 years of experience. And if you're interested in any sort of coaching inquiry, you can email me at randall@alwaysadaptive.com. And that's also my website, alwaysadaptive.com. I release a full podcast every Tuesday, and I release bonus segments throughout the week as well over on YouTube. So I hope I will see you at the next one, and I hope you have a fantastic day.